This is Jim and Jeffrey. We're back again for our edutainment, as you say. In the previous discussion, we talked about our linguistic approach to Bible study. Now, what that means is our goal is to let the text tell its own story. We want to know what it says. We don't want to read our beliefs into the text. We want to see where it will take us. And it's taken us to some really wild places. Something you need to know about studying your Bible is, first thing, throw away all the chapter and verse breaks, all those markers. About the 1500s CE, some Christian scholars inserted them. And they act like stop signs and yield signs. When you see a chapter break, you stop. How many people read their Bible like a chapter or two at a time? Well, sometimes right before the best part of the story, the chapter break stops it. So here we follow the text and see where the breaks are and where they conflict with our verses. We just have to dump them. So we'll be talking about this account we call the second account of creation in Genesis. And it begins in chapter 2, verse 4, part B. The first account ended in chapter 2, verse 4, part A. Now, I promise you, most people have no clue about that. They just assume that chapter 1 was one thing and chapter 2 is another. Wrong. So we're going to start here in 2:4b. And to show the difference between these two sections creates a real interesting situation, because we just had one full account about the creation of the heavens and the earth. And we know how it all went and what God did, this unnamed God, this unnamed Elohim did. And we're going to jump into the second account. It seems to be the polar opposite of everything we just learned in the first account. Now we're going to have to question things like, why did God do one thing here one way and something over there another way? We didn't do that in my church. You never question anything the Bible said about God. But here it's so obvious you have to question it. And so we will. So we're going to start out with the second account. And Jeffrey, if you will tell us about that.
Okay, so 2:4b says, in a day, must have been a big day, Yahweh Elohim made the earth and the heavens. Okay, notice what's first. 1:1, Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, but it's not really translated, while Elohim was created the heavens and the earth. So what is basically, let's show them what the difference is between the two of these things.
And if you know what happened in the first one, you know that the second one causes a real problem.
Right.
So whenever this author, this source talks about the heavens and the earth, he wasn't talking about where you go when you die, or a real planet in space, right? A round planet in space. Here's what he was talking about.
Okay. This is, if you notice, under that metal beaten dome, which we have beaten into your heads before, underneath that is where life happens.
And that dome is heaven.
That's right. The dome is heaven. So basically, in the second story, the Adam and Eve story, the earth comes first and then the heavens, which really doesn't make a lot of rational sense. If you look at this picture, if you're going to separate the waters and create a place for life and push waters away from one place so dry land appears, that's in the Elohim story. That's in the 7 days of creation story. Because then the earth, the earth is made second. The heavens, or the metal beaten dome, is created first. So because underneath that not only separates the waters, but it also gives you a place where life will happen. You don't get that picture in the second thing.
In the second one, if you take away the dome, the place floods.
That's right.
The water comes down, nothing's dry, so there can't be an earth without the heavens. And that's the conflict that a reader gets when they let the text tell its own story.
Right. We don't shellac it with the commentators and, you know, all the rest of it. We take a look at what they say, but we're really looking at what is the text telling us, and more importantly, what are the people hearing this? What are they hearing? You know, what is familiar to them? So 2:5 says, Yahweh Elohim had not sent the rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. So here is a hint about what humans are supposed to do.
Work.
Right, we're supposed to, and this comes out of, you know, the ancient Near East, that, you know, that usually humans were made to serve the gods, this kind of thing. And that not sent any rain on the earth. How are you going to send rain on the earth when nothing is there to create the rain? You know, so.
But in the first account, we had nothing dry. There was no dry anything. We had a big ocean.
Right.
Nothing dry. In the first account, water is the last thing they wanted. But in the second account, we're in a dry place with no water. See what we're talking about with two polar opposite stories going on here.
Right. You see it in the next thing. In Genesis 1:2, the earth was without form and void. I know people like that. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Ruach Elohim, the spirit of this Elohim, was hovering mirachefet al panei hamayim, over the face of the waters. In the Adam and Eve story, 2:6, this is what it says: a mist went up from the earth and watered all of the face of the ground. So here in this story, the only thing that is kind of the same is that the earth is kind of doing what Yahweh wants it to do.
Yeah, something. We don't know exactly what caused the mist to come up. It doesn't say. But this is paralleled in the first account by Elohim saying, light exists and light was created. So you have the first creation step in the Adam and Eve story is mist coming up to water the ground, where in the first account it was light being created. So
there could be distinctions.
Big distinctions there, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and what's the first thing that Yahweh makes in the garden story?
Yahweh Elohim formed the man, the human, whatever, of soil from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils this breath of life, and the man became a living soul. So I just have to say, I think I've mentioned before that I read lots and lots of creation stories from all different peoples from all over the place. Number one, our stories are unique in the fact that whatever is there, the deity is there before creation. Right? And then this idea of blowing a soul in through the nostril, I've seen that before. That's a common idea, in other ancient creation stories. So again, we're borrowing, from what's there.
And in the first account, what did Elohim do?
He creates humans in his image, in its image, in the image of Elohim. Elohim created male and female, created them.
So
Elohim did, not the earth.
Not the earth. But in this story, with the garden story, Yahweh creates a man. Elohim created a man and a woman, male and female. So in this story, we have a man sitting there, and in the Elohim, in the first story, humans were the last things created. In this story, the man is the first thing created.
Right.
So we have a man, a male, and Yahweh.
Do you think men created that story? Created first? Gee, I don't know. Yeah, it sounds awfully weird.
Yeah, so anyway, but keep that in mind, because you only had from Elohim, from the first story's model, you only had half the image of God created in this story. Something's missing, big time. Okay?
Then they're going to go through this rigmarole to figure out, what it is that's, what it is that's missing, and where does it come from?
So, in what's on Yahweh's mind? What does Yahweh want to do first now after He has the man?
Well, the first thing Yahweh does after that, Yahweh plants a garden towards the east, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in Eden, I think Eden has a few different meanings. It could be a plain. It could also be, that's Plain, or it could be a walled garden.
Yeah, or a place of luxury, a place of,
right.
Where everything's kind of like heaven, So,
right. So it's kind of like in one of those, movies where, the god or goddess, takes the little clay figure and puts him in. So this is what Yahweh does. He takes this clay, this thing made out of dirt, oil, whatever, puts it in this garden.
So He planted this garden. I mean, that's kind of a strange thing for an Elohim to be doing, planting a garden. The other story created the universe.
Right. In
this story, He plants a garden. That's something is kind of different.
He's downsizing.
Yeah, downsized. Now, what did He put in that garden?
Okay, so out of the garden, Yahweh Elohim causes to grow every tree that's pleasing to the sight and good for food. Tov, for food, right? Mm-hmm. Here's that word tov again. Right, because it'll keep cropping up, because that's part of the definition, right? It's pleasing to the eye of Elohim.
Yeah, and in the first account, tov was the big word,
right?
Because the Creator measured everything it created by tov's standard, and for something to be tov, it had to be beautiful and pleasing to the eyes, and protect lives, preserve lives, make lives more functional, and increase the quality of life.
It should be fully functional,
right?
But here. Right, it's pleasing to the sight. And then, okay, now we've mentioned before, in many cultures, what is the big thing? Even after you're dead, it's to live forever, right? So here is this passing reference to the tree of life, right? Because if you ate of this tree, you would live forever. You would be an immortal. And in the middle, both of these were in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of Tov and Ra. So it's setting up this business of Tov, right? And remember what we said. The opposite of Tov, anything that protects, preserves, makes life more functional, increases its quality. The Ra would be anything that destroys life, that makes it less, takes its quality away, that makes it less functional, unable to function. That is the opposite of what Tov is here. So, and
the way they translate Ra is
evil.
Evil. So this is a new definition of evil, folks. And this is really big. If you use this evil to measure actions today, you are going to get some really interesting results.
Right.
So we have a garden. In the middle of it, Yahweh calls this tree of life to appear. He calls this tree of knowledge of Tov and Ra to appear. It's like you said, all kinds of myths from the Middle East and the East. Plants of life, tree of lives are common. They're everywhere. But nobody else has a tree of the knowledge of Tov and Ra. That's a unique thing to this text.
Right, because I think it's also giving us a really big hint, again, as to the future of humans. What are humans, what is going to mark us as different? We're the only species on the planet that knows the difference between Tov and Ra. Other species do not understand this, nor do they need to know it. Only we do. That's why I keep saying it for a long time. This whole thing is a setup.
It's a big setup. This is a big setup.
It's a setup. Let's take a look for a moment at what Elohim says in the first story, the 7 days of creation. Elohim says, let the earth cause to sprout green vegetation, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind. Why? Because everything is given the ability to reproduce itself naturally. We're the only ones, plants, as far as we know, and animals really don't make love. They have, they have sex so they can progenerate, progenerate. So this is something that, that marks us as different.
And you said a while ago that Yahweh took this guy from somewhere west of the garden,
wherever it was formed,
and took him to the east and put him in,
places him in this walled
in
place.
this garden.
This garden.
And that verse 2:15, that has something really interesting. Read that to us, would you?
And Yahweh Elohim took the man and settled him into the garden towards Eden to serve her and guard her.
Now, this is one of those things that really catches your attention. Is if we take our lexicon and look up the word "gan" for garden, it'll say masculine. This is a masculine word. Now, you can make it a feminine by adding a "ah" on the end of it, but here it's a masculine word. So for the ancient audience listening to this story being told, he put him in the garden to guard and protect, serve her. Who's the her? It's not the garden, even though most translators translate it that way. The ancient audience knew he's talking about a her, and Yahweh's not a her, the man's not a her, the garden's not a her.
And there's nothing else there.
So who is she? This is that setup you're talking about. The ancient readers caught it. They knew that we need to be looking out for who this her is because she's a big part of the story. And so
why don't women, to serve her? So why don't men serve women more?
You might start a movement here. Okay,
I don't know. Don't burn my house down. Okay.
But look what Yahweh does next now. This is really big right here.
Okay, so Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, of Tov and Ra, don't eat from it, for in the day that you eat from it, you shall surely die. Because remember I told you that the Bible also tells you why things are the way they are? Where does something come from? Why do we do certain things? This introduces the idea of death.
Oh, yeah. First time the word shows up in the whole text.
That's right.
But how different is what Yahweh did from what Elohim did whenever he made those humans?
Well, here there's, that these are my rules. In the Elohim story, there's a blessing. Elohim blessed them, and Elohim said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill up the earth, and subdue your earth soul, her. Have shepherding dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So
in the first story, the Creator blesses the humans, the male and the female, together at the same time. And in that blessing, he empowers them and teaches them their roles. In this story, Yahweh commands the guy. Would you rather be commanded or blessed? You get two different kinds of results in how you treat people. Commanding them really doesn't work well in most cases.
Unless they're in fear of their life.
Yeah, but blessing works a lot better.
Right.
Anyway, before we end this one, in that little commandment that he gave, there's a Hebrew word called, it's mimenu. It's a big word, and it's translated from it. Whenever Yahweh says, you shall not eat from it, it means mimenu. This is a huge word. We've got to track it through this story. And this is the first 2 times it appears in the story. So just keep that in mind. Now we're going to take a break here and see what happens next in the next discussion. Thank you.